The architects of the ancient world did not just build monuments to the gods, they built monuments to agony. When a ruler wanted to ensure total submission, death was never enough. Death was simply the biological end of a rebellion. What these monarchs required was theatre. They transformed the destruction of the human body into a calculated display of absolute power, designing punishment so meticulously cruel that their mere mention could break an uprising before a single sword was drawn. This was an era where the law was written in blood and suffering was engineered with terrifying precision. From the scorched brass of Sicily to the suffocating towers of Persia, the methods of execution devised by the ancient world reveal a darkness that historians often struggle to document. That is where we begin. Phalaris conducted executions inside bronze bulls. The screams of the condemned were not meant to be heard. They were meant to be orchestrated. In the 6th century BCE, the Greek colony of Artaxerxes in Sicily fell under the control of a tyrant named Phalaris. He demanded a method of execution that would not merely kill his enemies, but mock their suffering. A local sculptor named Persian provided the solution. He forged a hollow, life-sized bull entirely out of solid bronze. The device featured a hidden trapdoor on its flank, just large enough to place a person inside. Once the individual was secured in the dark metallic belly, guards applied intense heat directly beneath the statue. As the bronze slowly heated, the internal temperature became an inescapable oven. But the true horror of the brazen bull was its acoustic engineering. Persian had constructed a complex system of internal tubes, stops, and resonating chambers within the statue's nasal cavity. When the individual inside inevitably began to shriek from the extreme heat, the pipes distorted the human sound. To the tyrant and the spectators gathered in the courtyard, the desperate cries of a dying person were transformed into the deep, rhythmic bellowing of an infuriated bull. Smoke from the intense process poured from the animal's nostrils, completing the illusion. The mechanism turned absolute agony into a macabre performance. Phalaris could watch his political rivals perish without ever having to witness the ugly reality of their pain. The heavy bronze shell hid the severe physical destruction, filtering the horror into a clean, detached spectacle of power. While historical accounts debate whether Phalaris was entirely real or exaggerated by later Greek writers, the persistence of the brazen bull in historical records highlights a profound truth about authoritarian rule. It reveals a chilling desire to strip the victim of their voice, ensuring that even in their final moments of agony, they were forced to provide entertainment for the state. It is said that Persian, the ambitious inventor, was compelled by Phalaris to be the first to test his own creation. He was secured inside and the fires were lit, though the tyrant supposedly removed him before he died, only to discard him from a cliff. Phalaris himself would eventually meet the same fate, overthrown by his subjects and placed into the very bronze oven he had commissioned. The fires of Sicily eventually cooled. But across the sea, another empire was perfecting a method that required no bronze, only the slow, relentless consumption of nature. Persians overcome by nature in boats. A slow death is a terrifying prospect. A death where the body becomes a living ecosystem is something far worse. The Achaemenid Persian Empire commanded vast armies and untold wealth, yet historical accounts suggest they also harbored a profound understanding of psychological terror. The Greeks, particularly the biographer Plutarch, recorded a Persian execution method reserved for the most despised traitors and oathbreakers. It was known as scaphism, derived from the Greek word for boat. The process was deceptively simple in its setup, yet incomprehensible in its duration. The condemned was left entirely exposed and placed on their back inside a narrow wooden boat. A second, identical boat was then placed tightly over the first, leaving only the individual's head, hands, and feet protruding from the wooden shell. Guards then compelled the prisoner to consume massive quantities of milk and honey, continuing the regular consumption until severe dehydrating distress set in. The same sticky mixture of honey and milk was meticulously smeared across the individual's exposed face, eyes, and appendages. Then, the boats were pushed out onto a stagnant, sun-baked pond. The sweet scent and the accumulating waste acted as a beacon. Swarms of wasps, flies, and stinging insects descended upon the exposed skin, settling within the eyes, ears, and mouth. Inside the enclosed boats, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The individual's own waste bred organisms, which began to affect the body, overtaking the person from the inside out. This execution was not a matter of hours. It was a matter of weeks. The guards returned daily, providing more sustenance to the individual to prevent the mercy of starvation. Plutarch documented the case of a young Persian soldier named Mithridates, who was condemned to this fate by King Artaxerxes II for drunkenly boasting about killing the king's rival in battle. According to the record, Mithridates survived inside the boats for 17 agonizing days before his body finally succumbed to the infection and process. The body was intentionally kept alive just so the torment could continue. It is a striking reminder of how far human ingenuity can stretch when its sole purpose is the infliction of pain. The Persians dragged out the dying process to its absolute biological limit, turning the human body into a prison that it could not escape. But on the vast steppes of Central Asia, another conquering force faced a very different problem: how to execute a ruler without angering the gods. Overcome within carpets to avoid shedding blood. To the Mongol Empire, blood was sacred, but their reverence for it did not save the lives of their enemies. It only dictated how they would die. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols forged the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Their military campaigns were marked by devastating efficiency and overwhelming force. But they possessed a unique cultural and legal taboo enshrined in their traditional code, the yasa. Mongol tradition dictated that the blood of royalty, even enemy royalty, held a divine connection to the earth and the sky. Spilling royal blood upon the ground was considered a grave spiritual offense that would pollute the soil and invite the wrath of the heavens. This belief created a logistical complication when dealing with captured kings, princes, and rival khans. These figures had to be eliminated to prevent future uprisings, but they could not be beheaded or stabbed. The solution the Mongol commanders devised was a masterclass in brutal pragmatism. When the Mongols captured the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim after the devastating fall of Baghdad in 1258, they enclosed him tightly in a heavy, ornate carpet. Once the ruler was securely contained inside the dark, heavy wool, the Mongol cavalry was summoned. The riders directed their war horses directly over the rolled-up carpet. The sheer weight of the armored animals ended the life of the caliph in a chaotic, deafening stampede. Physical form failed, breathing ceased. The ruler of one of the world's greatest intellectual centers was reduced to a broken form beneath the hooves of the Mongol vanguard. The act was perfectly legal under their code. Not a single drop of royal blood had visibly touched the soil. The spiritual cleanliness of the execution stood in stark contrast to the physical devastation inflicted upon the individual. This was not an isolated incident. Decades earlier, after the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, Mongol generals captured several high-ranking noblemen of the Kievan Rus. Rather than a carpet, the Mongols laid the defeated princes on the ground and placed heavy wooden floorboards over them. The Mongol commanders then held their victory banquet directly on top of the boards, slowly ending the lives of the Russian nobility as the Mongols ate, drank, and celebrated their triumph above. The Mongols had found a way to honor the divine status of their enemies while simultaneously erasing them from the map. It demonstrated an empire adapting its violence to fit its laws. Yet, centuries earlier in Mesopotamia, another empire had no such reservations about the sight of blood. In fact, they used it as a warning. Assyrian kings displayed enemies on city walls. Rebellions against the Neo-Assyrian machine did not end with battlefield defeats. They ended with anatomy lessons. When a kingdom in the ancient Near East refused to pay tribute to Nineveh, the imperial response was swift, overwhelming, and meticulously documented. Rulers like Ashurnasirpal didn't just conquer territories, they turned the bodies of dissenting leaders into municipal architecture. Captive kings and defiant governors were brought before their own city gates. There, trained soldiers used specialized tools to make precise, shallow marks along the prisoner's legs and torso. They removed the outer layers from the individual in massive, unbroken sheets. The individual remained fully conscious as their protective barrier was slowly stripped away, exposing raw tissue to the burning desert air. The agony was immediate, total, and inescapable. The process was deliberate. It was not born from the frenzy of combat, but from cold administrative logic. The state required a method of punishment that would resonate far beyond the immediate individual. By stretching and pinning these empty remains over the stone pillars and walls of the defeated city, the empire fundamentally changed the landscape. They transformed the physical remains of a former sovereign into a permanent billboard of Assyrian dominance. It was a visual language of terror that required no translation, proving that imperial law extended down to the very skin of its subjects. This psychological warfare kept neighboring vassals paralyzed with fear for generations. But terror is a volatile currency to stockpile, and the hatred it generated would eventually come to collect its debts. Expired in high Persian ash chambers. Some punishments were designed for the public square, others were meant for the dock. Long after the age of scaphism, the Persian and subsequent Seleucid empires utilized a method of execution that was remarkably quiet, completely invisible to the public, and utterly devastating to the individual. It was reserved specifically for high-ranking political criminals, men of noble birth, royal conspirators, or treasonous generals. The state constructed towering hollow structures, essentially massive silos or dry wells, specifically for this purpose. These towers, sometimes reaching 50 cubits high, were filled to a considerable depth with fine, loose wood ash. At the very top, a platform or trapdoor hovered over the abyss. When a nobleman was condemned to die for plotting against the crown, he was brought to the precipice. The guards did not strike him or draw his blood. They simply directed him into the darkness. The prisoner plummeted into the thick, unstable bed of ash below. The immediate impact stirred up massive, choking clouds of the microscopic dust. Every frantic movement the individual made to climb the smooth, windowless walls only agitated the ash further, creating an inescapable fog. With no fresh air filtering into the deep-sealed chamber, every panicked breath drew the powder deep into the internal systems. The respiratory system fought a losing battle. The ash clung to the natural moisture in the internal pathways, forming a thick material that slowly restricted the body's oxygen supply. There was no fire, no sharp instruments, and no visible blood. Just a man buried in the remnants of a fire long extinguished, expiring in total, lightless isolation. It was a sterile, bureaucratic end to a human life. By using the ash tower, the ancient kings could eliminate their most powerful rivals without leaving a physical mark on their bodies, locking their treason away in a silent, suffocating tomb. The state remained completely detached from the physical act of killing. The ash did the work. The ancient world operated on a harsh frequency, where the destruction of the human body was treated as a tool of governance. From the acoustic torture of Phalaris's bronze bull to the suffocating silence of the Persian ash towers, these rulers did not merely seek to remove their enemies. They sought to dismantle their humanity. These methods were instruments of statecraft, designed to cast a shadow of fear so long that it would outlast the empires themselves. When you look back at these systematic architectures of cruelty, what terrifies you more? The imagination required to invent them, or the fact that thousands of ordinary soldiers were willing to carry them out. The stones of these empires have crumbled, but the echoes of their cruelty remain perfectly preserved in the historical record.